So, just to give you a brief history, UMH was started in 1968, and our goal is to provide quality, affordable housing to the markets that we're in. We do that through manufactured housing. So, a lot of people think of manufactured housing as trailer homes or trailer parks and so on, and it often gets a really bad rap. But I'm here to, kind of, introduce you guys if you don't know, or, give you guys some insight into what manufactured homes are today in 2026. It's really important for us to understand the solutions that are out there in the housing market. If we're not affected by it directly, I know that we know somebody that is, whether it be, somebody's child that can't get it or a friend that can't get a home, they're missing out on a true wealth creation. And it's something that, people in my generation and younger, and some that are possibly older than me, are also facing, the hardships of. Just to give you a quick background, what I want to, briefly discuss is the housing market, go into, you know, what that means on a social level. I think what UMH tries to do in sustainability is not just focus on the environmental side, but really push, what it means to be a social company and what it means to, create lasting communities. Going into the environmental side, finally finish off with a little bit more on UMH. But as we know that there's a 4 million housing shortage in the United States. That's due to a lot of high cost construction. The input prices for homes have gone up. Uh, while that's happened, there's also a lack of workers that are able to, work on these homes. There's a aging population of people in the construction industry that actually do this type of work. And on top of that, they're actually getting paid more than they were in the past, which is great to hear, but they're producing less. So we're actually paying more for less housing. And that's having a, a dramatic, imbalance in the supply of homes that we desperately need in the country. There's a lot of zoning and permitting reform that's needed, especially for around manufactured housing. It's kind of, the ugly child of the housing industry. So even if, we do land lease communities, which is an option, I just want to also make this clear too. I'm not here just, promoting land lease communities and offsite construction. This is a serious problem that we're dealing with in our country, and there's more than one solution. This is a solution, but there's more than one. Not everybody here needs to live in a manufactured house. Not everybody needs to live in a land lease community, but there are people that need that, and this is an underutilized tool. So I just want to, continue to be a catalyst for, this type of housing, and for those people, which tends to be low income earners. Um, so this zoning restrictions are, you want to build a single family home, you can buy a manufactured home from a retailer or somebody, and then you get it to put on your own land, and there are stipulations about, what an actual single family home is, and that it can be disastrous to the overall cost of that project and the timelines that were estimated. And then finally, financing and construction. While there are some great products that are out there, as was noted in some of the previous presentations, interest rates are going up. That's leading to higher costs for developers, leading to higher costs for homeowners, and so on. So these increased financing costs, end up, uh, making this 4 million shortage a lot higher, and that's going to continue to be a rolling snowball as um, we continue to underproduce homes in the U.S. Um, and this is why I think that UMH is unique in the sense that we're able to provide affordable housing. So across all of our 145 communities, 27,000 sites, in 12 different states, um, all of our communities are affordable to low income earners based on the area median income of where we are. That means that we're affordable, that people are not going to be spending more than 30% of their income on housing based on our actual rents. Um, why is that important? Is because it creates, stable housing. And stable housing is in order for us to do things that, allow us to care about, what's going on in our environment. I was, talking to some people earlier today. It's really hard to care about, rising waters and so on when you can't, afford to, pay the grocery bill, or you can't afford to do, what's necessary to feed and care for your family. And at the end of the day, a lot of these problems that we are having, you know, uh, the end result is ended up being a social problem. And housing itself is also a driver of our economics. If somebody can't move to where the jobs are because because it's too expensive, then they end up, missing out on that job. And uh, I think it was in the 1960s or so on, a janitor can move to New York City and earn more money than he did in Detroit. A lawyer can move to New York City, earn more money than he did in Detroit. But nowadays, only the lawyer can do that. The person that lives in New York can no longer, afford to move and, find better housing, find better jobs. And that ends up creating a net negative for our productivity as a nation. Um, yeah, as I said, it helps to strengthen workforce stability. Um, as I also mentioned, these health outcomes of when you're spending too much on your home, it makes you decide whether or not you're going to go to the doctor, see a dentist, do other things that are just critical to, you, which ends up making you more of a benefit to your underlying society and to your community and your neighbors. Obviously, education, somebody that is worrying about whether or not, they have to do something, or a parent that can provide, outside of school education for their children compared to somebody that's sitting a tutor or so on. These types of hardships are what go on when you just can't afford your housing. And finally, that ends up to build that community resilience. So apart from the social aspect, just living in a more affordable way, it can create these environmental benefits. There we go. So one that I want to point out is off-site construction. This doesn't just have to do with manufactured housing. And to just give you guys an insight, manufactured housing, prefabricated housing, modular housing, they're all somewhat similar, kind of like cousins, but they're not exactly the same. So we delve strictly with manufactured housing, and that means that it's built to one code, one federal code, the HUD code. But modular housing, panelized housing, and so on, that's built to stay in local codes. But they're all built in a factory. So one factory could, put on its line and build all MH, and then, the next day do some modular. Kind of depends on the factory itself, but excuse me, in order to, increase efficiency, they're going to try to, standardize their processes. Um, but one of our factories that will we once again, we're a land lease community, so we don't actually construct the homes. We work with uh, factories that do it, and they actually got all their 40 factories to be LEED certified. So it's something that they take very seriously in our industry. The thing about when you're building homes in a factory, it may sound like it's inferior or less quality, but the thing about it is everything else that you depend on is built in a factory, whether it be your phones, your microwave, your shower, like stuff for components for your shower, everything is built in a factory. And it's because it does things in the best way possible. You're able to figure out, what needs to be better, how you can make yourself more efficient, what people you need, what tools you need, and so on. We have a great example I'll get into later about when we were doing the roof installations. Um, but when you're built in a factory, you're able to control your waste. So a lot of these factories, when they have waste, it's being reused. So if they said, all right, this home needs 1,000 shingles, right, and then they have 2,000 shingles, just goes into the next home and to the next home. So it allows for things to be done in a lot more efficient way. There's less scraps and so on, and they're able to recycle those scraps and not just throw it into a big dumpster. It leads to lower carbon intensity because people drive straight to the factory. They're not driving to the home site where it's being built and then going back to Lowe's to get something and then going back to the site and doing all these different things. Yes, we have to take our home from the factory to our site, but there's plenty of factories in and around our communities or wherever the land would be, so that you would end up buying from one of those factories that are near to where you are. And then the homes that we buy, not all of them, but a lot of them are built to a higher standard. Whether that be, Department of Energy, Zero Energy Ready Homes, one of the manufacturers we buy from. that was the only homes that they were producing. Things are going to change slightly because of the Inflation Reduction Act. But they were also they would get a credit for that, and then other factories would get a credit for doing Energy Star rated homes. These next couple slides will just be some pictures. This is one of our communities out in New York. This is another community out in Indiana. And then one of the big things that we did, and I was very proud to work on, and we have somebody here from GAF Energy, Fanwell, is we wanted to provide more affordability to our residents. We're not really, as UMH, really even making any money from doing something like this. We're not also paying for it, but the main goal is to provide our residents with a easier way to pay their bills. What we did was we did a factory installation of solar shingles, so not solar panels. These are built in a factory. If we were to put the panels on the home, it would have avoided the roof warranty because they're drilling into the roof, and also would have had problems driving down the highway at 70 miles an hour. So we worked with the factory to come up with the solution, and that solution was solar shingles. We did our first ever installation in 2024 on a duplex home at the Innovative Housing Showcase. This is not necessarily the best picture, but on the left, that house is actually on the National Mall in DC, where we brought a multi-section manufactured home where they put solar shingles on one half and then left the other half. And that's something that we're tracking now to see what the energy production is and what the cost savings are on one half of this duplex, and the other half was is being left as is. So, well, not only was it a new innovation in the fact that it was a duplex home, but we had solar shingles on it. Fast forward to last year, we brought this blue house to the Innovative Housing Showcase, a different house. This one actually had a battery on it as well, so it showed resiliency and how we could actually, power a home almost, it's still tied to the grid and would use grid activity, but as less and less and less. And that's the goal. That's less bills for our resident, and then they can, use that, as I said, for the different, if they need more food for the housing, being that it's a low income earner or others. And to give you a little tidbit, this was done in the factory. So in the factory, they can shingle a manufactured home roof in about 30 minutes. They did this first one with the solar shingles in about an hour and a half. So obviously the factory guys weren't too happy at first, but they actually ended up getting it down to like 48 minutes or so. So that was after like 10 or after like the 15th home or so. Well, after the second home, but by the 15th, 20th home, they were able to get it down. And if they were to be doing 200 homes, I think they could also get it down to the to that 30-minute, 25-minute mark that they really do for a regular shingle, because it's a new product. They were getting used to it. They were scared to step on it. Would it break? Would it not break? But these are actually warranted shingles. If we didn't have them turned on for a couple months, unfortunately, did some utility delays, and they acted just fine as a regular shingle. As I spoke already, we have these Energy Star homes. They reduce, the usage by 10 to 30%. Department of Energy homes potentially by 50%. They're able to do this because they're built with a tighter envelope. They have better HVAC systems in them. They, use Energy Star rated appliances and other things that really help to drive down the cost. When you pair that with solar shingles, then it gets down even more. And I have goals of creating, one of the first ever net zero manufactured homes with the stuff that we're working on. So that's definitely a future goal for us. Skip over to how and why we're able to do this really quickly. We're a REIT, so we don't have to pay any income tax. That really helps us in order to uh, uh, drive down costs for our residents. In the end, we have this land lease platform that helps us share costs around for our residents, so that also helps to drive down the costs. We buy homes that are built in a factory, they're typically built at half the cost per square foot as a standalone site built home. And we typically buy value add communities. So these communities are priced, but well, the sites on the communities end up being priced below replacement costs. So when we buy, a site that has 50% vacancy, we're not necessarily paying for those 50% vacant homes. But to develop them could be 100,000 or whatever. So we're basically getting those sites for free, putting in half cost homes, not paying income tax, and doing all this stuff that allows us to drive down the cost for our residents. As I said, we have 145 communities, 27,000 developed sites, 11,000 rentals where somebody's renting both the land and the home. And our average rent on those is $1,044. So, what we try to do is drive value in a way that it's not through increasing rents. We have 3,500 vacant sites, so that's plenty of room for us to grow in the near future. Yeah, this last slide is just a quick uh, oops, is a quick summarization that we're able to do it affordably, sustainably, and at scale. So thank you guys.